beautiful spring day. Our meditation together was kind of wild. There was a wood chipper going, a marimba band playing. I thought they were like fighting for my spirit. Kiddos and then gusts of wind. Yeah, really kind of invigorating. So I wish that I got the homework, the sort of compilation of the homework out to everyone. Unfortunately, I didn't get to it. And actually, it sort of works because I send out that follow-up email. So I'll send the compilation of everyone's ethical conundrums. I'll put that in a Word document or a PDF. Can anyone not open a Word document? Maybe that's a good question.
Well, I might not be able to on my phone. PDF, I'm not sure.
Okay, I'll PDF. I have that power. So I'll make a PDF too. It's been a real pleasure to read them. It's just so nice. I don't know what it is to realize that everyone has inquiry and questions and places where they're stumbling and learning and growing. And so I invite everyone to spend some time with that. And in a similar vein, there's quite a bit of courageous, vulnerable sharing that's happening in these offerings, and I'm putting people's names next to them. I think that was said, and that's all explicit that we were all sharing in this way. But just a point that, it's not a good way once we're all here together to say, hey, Bob, you're the one who's a jerk to your coworker. Me too. Like, that's not the proper way to use these, but to recognize that was offered in a kind of trusting way. And so maybe after you're good friends, you can bring something up tenderly, but to let those be something we share in this space together, and that we don't explicitly talk with other people outside of this group with as well. But how was the homework for people? Maybe we don't have so much time right now, but did someone really, really, really enjoy it? Anyone? Erin? Yeah, you want to?
This is the day I really, really enjoyed it. That's
oh yeah, it wasn't.
My hand, but sorry.
No.
For me, it was sort of which one do I choose? Like which of these dilemmas? And I have to say, some of them I didn't actually answer in my head, and I didn't put that in an email. But sort of, I didn't know what the answer was. I just know I feel conflicted about this moment and how I should have responded. Mm-hmm. But maybe I shouldn't have responded any differently. I'm still wrestling with that. Mm-hmm. But it was an interesting exercise. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Even if I didn't write these other pieces. So. Yeah, I appreciate it. Mm-hmm.
I've noticed I've started keeping something like a significance diary, I might call it, just at the end of the day, if a few kind of my emotional terrain of my day, if a few things stick out, being like, oh, that was intense, or that was really lovely, or this stuck out for me in one way or another, just to even just writing a sentence about it to help me stay with it in a different way. It's so easy for all of that grist of our lives just to kind of muddle together or to fall off by the wayside, keep a dream diary. And that's been a real joy to be like, if I pay attention to it, I can remember my dreams, and there's so much richness and beauty there. And I think the same is true for kind of ethical life, that if you stop and be like, what's the ebb and flows of the valleys and the mountains, that something can open up if we decide to cultivate that. Maybe anyone online want to share something about the homework? Is it bothersome when I call you guys out? They're all laughing. You guys can't see, but I can see their faces.
Well, I guess.
Yeah, go ahead, James. Yeah.
I think the most challenging part was finding the small thing. You sit down and you go through the week. You're like, well, oh no, that's too big. Okay, no, not that one. And then you have to choose. Finding the small one was I think the challenge there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes total sense. Thanks for sharing. Did anyone else kind of feel that way too? The big things really appear and be like, okay, what's just kind of a small terrain? Yeah, some nods in the class. Man, it's gonna be so great when we're all together. We're holding on.
I almost think it was more interesting finding the small thing because it's not something that's obvious, but it was sort of made me think more about my everyday interactions that I often kind of ignore or just take for granted. And so I examined sort of more intimately things that I think I sometimes just kind of like gloss over. So whereas later I could have grabbed the big things, the more obvious things. And so I liked more the subtlety of it.
I think I'm actually a little bit maybe the opposite. That it's like I can see how I can go to a neurotic place very quickly. For example, I live in community, and it's like I get up to go to the bathroom, and I'm like, okay, what time is it? Who's probably sleeping right now? Does that mean I go down the stairs? Am I gonna wake them up if I go down the stairs? Or is it more annoying if I go to the bathroom right next to their room? And I can just like, it's like totally, washing machine it in my mind. So, anywho, we're probably all somewhere in that scale. Okay, so I guess we'll bracket that homework exercise, and of course I'll send that out tomorrow. And there's something I wanted to start class with after talking about homework, and this is an offering from Sarah here in class. She shot me an email, and I thought it was so worthwhile and poignant that I just said, hey, can I read your email to the class? And she said, sure, and she'll jump in afterwards if she has anything else to add. Hi, Genjo. I hope you don't mind me sending you this, which I never do. So please send me anything you feel is interesting or inspiring. But I found some info that directly relates to the founding of the ethical codes in Buddhism that you haven't covered explicitly yet, and I wanted to share it. When you said in class that one of the rules for bhikkhunis, that's the word for nuns, bhikkhunis, nuns in Buddhist time, is that they couldn't walk home late at night because they were more likely to be attacked, it made me want to shout that has not changed. Women here and now have the same issue and even the same admonishment. Don't walk home at night alone. That sent me down a rabbit hole of looking at information about how women lived in the time of the Buddha and how the caste system interacted with the founding of Buddhism. Women were completely controlled by men for their entire lives, their fathers, then their husbands, then their sons. So there wasn't even a remote presumption that they could lead lives apart from the will of men or that they were in any way equal. Quite the opposite. They were considered obviously inferior in a way we can't even conceive of here, really. And I suspect saying women couldn't practice Buddhism back then was like asserting that a cow or a chicken could do it now. They were property, they were currency, they lacked agency. As for the Buddha's ethical code, I found something intriguing saying it can be seen as one of the first attempts in the world to create equality in society based on what actions you performed, rather than what caste or class you were born into. It resonates with Dr. Martin Luther King saying all people should be judged by the content of their character. When Buddhism was founded, the concept of karma was used as a type of bludgeon to keep people in their caste and in their place. It was a tool of oppression used to say that you were born in a superior or inferior caste for a reason, and you had to live out your life in that role to receive a better rebirth. The Buddha said it was how ethically you lived that determined if you were a good or a bad person, not your caste. See below for more details on the Buddha and the caste system. And she sent a whole bunch of articles that related to this topic. So I'm going to send them out with this follow-up email for everyone. So we don't have time here to cover all of this, but I thought that it was just so kind of on point and so easy to kind of gloss over that we could turn towards that and hear her words and receive her kind of fieriness there. Sarah, do you want to say anything else? Do you have anything else you want to add?
Just the thing that I was referencing to see at the bottom was like a small article that just talks about, when the Buddha founded things, it was in a totally different society. And so, the class you were born into was more important than the actions that you performed. So setting up the monasteries and things like that and saying that was actually what was more important was a radical thing.
And so it just kind of gives some idea of why there had to be certain rules and maybe why they had to be applied to everybody in a certain way. Because what I had asked in the last class was why, if, you know, there can be some sort of view that morality is not set, that something can seem good or bad based on the situation, not that it's like an empirical rule, then why were things formulated as empirical rules, right? Like that's kind of what I was trying to ask about what we had read from Ejo's Teisho. And so this is kind of part of the answer that I found, was like, well, there were specific rules so that everyone had to be on the same playing field, not because those specific rules never change or are empirical, but because they had to do that to transform the way that the society was living. So that kind of helped me balance the concept of like, why would you set out empirical rules and then we go into the Dharma and it's like, well, that's not really true. It doesn't necessarily work that way all the time. So that's kind of where that
Yeah, to imagine a caste where you had certain rules about your life if you were a Brahmin, if you were in a warrior caste or something like that. It actually fits more. It's just like, well, that's just how the world worked. Like you were in this caste and then you could leave that one, but you didn't. You entered kind of a new group, you could say, the monastic class, which had a certain kind of container around it. There's a really beautiful story about a bunch of young men. I think there was, how do I put this? When the Buddha woke up, a bunch of young men were super inspired and said, we're going to become monks. Shakyamuni is so great. And they were all wealthy and like the kind of nobility of a certain clan. And it was like 7 or 8 of these young men just like up and left. And all their parents were really upset. They were like, who's going to lead the kingdom? Like they all just left. They're following the Buddha. But when they decided to do this, they sort of made the pact as friends. And then one of their servants overheard. And he said, me too. He said, I can do this too. I can be on, like, I'm not lesser than any of them if I do this. And they heard this and they actually said, please, I forget his name, but they told the servant to become a monk first, so he would be their senior in the Dharma. They said, this is our way to show that we want to live a different way and not just kind of maintain our superiority. So anywho, the significance of the caste and the seniority was just so pervasive in a way it's hard for us to imagine.
Can I say one last thing? Sure. And also the concept with karma, that when karma was already around as a concept when the Buddha, came to enlightenment, and that it was used as a way to keep people in their place in a lot of ways. And the idea that your intention is part of karma and part of how you can break karmic cycles is through intention I think that was new. I think part of that was new.
It's totally new.
Yeah, and also that obviously karma relates to why you would have certain rules of conduct.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, it was kind of a direct shot at the caste system, basically, saying that it was sort of cosmic in a sense and set in stone, that your intention, or it was exactly how you were born in this life that meant your past lives, meant something and entailed something about your future lives, but really just kept the elite class in power. Well, thank you for your efforts and sharing. So we'll send out more reading along that line of inquiry for everyone in that email. So last week, I presented a narrative about the evolutions from this codes of conduct that Sarah was bringing up, and how we've arrived at sort of this formulation of an ethical code, these Bodhisattva Precepts. And one of the main ideas I sort of brought us to is that after some interesting historical turns and twists and going through different cultures, was that there were 2 parts to this word sila or precepts. Actually, scratch that, not sila, but this word ethical code that was defining this word sila or virtue. And those 2 words were kai and ritsu. Kai was the word that denoted kind of the spirit or essence of virtue and ethical living. And ritsu was this word that meant something very much like code or form or shape, right? So seeing that both of those are alive in ethical standards. And what we've received today, this happened, I forget exactly historically where this shift changed, but that they specifically dropped the ritsu in Zen, and maybe earlier in Chan places as well. And that's really radically affected what we've received today. We've received the Kai, or the spirit, pointing us towards we've received a formulation that's pointing us to a spirit of engagement rather than a defined set of rules. And so from here, we would say that the Ritsu, the actual form that takes in our life, must come forth from the Kai. We have to, as individual practitioners with different shapes of our lives, we have to find out where the rubber meets the road, to say. And that emergence, that tract, that arc, you could say, I think frames up really well within our Bodhisattva Precepts. And do people have that sheet that I had last class, the one of the 16 Bodhisattva Precepts? I should have told people to bring it tonight. Well, if you have it in front of you, it might be easier to follow some of this conversation if it's there. So our Bodhisattva Precepts start out with taking refuge. So I won't say too much about that here, but refuge, that there's such a thing as awakening life and that someone's kind of accomplished that. And refuge in the Dharma, that teachings have been offered that can point us to that when we engage them and invest towards them. And then taking refuge in the Sangha, that there are people now, living communities that are trying to put both of those into action to create more beautiful human life. So that's how you start in moving into the precepts. Those are up front. And then after that, here's where, for me at least, a lot of the juice is for the precepts. The 3 pure precepts. This embracing codes and forms, embracing good dharmas, and embracing living beings. And for me here, this is a kind of layering of depth that's put up alongside these 10 grave precepts, these prohibitory rules, you could say, that are in some ways, on face value, kind of impossible to live out. And these 3 pure precepts, I think, point us towards increasing subtlety of how to approach these prohibitory precepts. So that first one, you remember this is all review from last class, sort of why I'm going at whirlwind speed. The first one here is also translated as refraining from evil. So embracing codes and forms. And I think we'll affectionately refer to that here as just stop. Don't do it. You're feeling an urge, just stop. And it's really easy. I don't know if it's for everyone, but for me to kind of gloss over that. It's like, okay, I get that. Get me to the kind of more interesting, subtle, nitty-gritty place. But reflecting on there of how important it is to sort of see the red flags in our life and recognize just to stop. I think for me, sometimes in the evening, I'm like, oh, life's hard. I just want a giant bowl of pasta and a bowl of ice cream. I'm going to go that way. And although, that's not written explicitly, I know that's kind of a red flag to be like, that's not going to be helpful for your life right now. Maybe it is sometimes, but, sometimes I'm working to not just flow all my energy that way. So to actually just go lay on the floor for a few minutes, even face down and feel totally ridiculous and just stop, is such a blessing. And it's possible when you feel cravings, urges, gut reactions, just to holster. And you don't need to know why. You don't have to have subtle reasons or analysis of what's going on there, but just to receive the stop of our life. Or if you're trying not to kill bugs anymore, recognizing that that's a weird, harmful energy flowing through your being, just stop. So there being that you could say maybe the gross level of the offering of the precepts. Just stop. Embrace the codes and the forms that are stated. Yeah, Matthew?
So is this kind of pointing towards the Ritsu? As far as
I would say so, yeah.
That relationship between the two?
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe one more subtlety there is no, not really. I think that's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, because we don't have, as I was thinking about this, reading them, I've been in different contexts in my lives and with different codes and forms. And in this new one, there's not really a manual that's handed to you because that's actually been taken away.
Yeah, for sure. Your life, it has to emerge out of the context of your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So in the next one, embracing good dharmas, words I wrote next to this were pour into goodness. So to take up the positive side of all of these precepts, or let's say not dealing in intoxicants, is embracing clarity of mind. There are actually many more traditional ways that those are all phrased that you could find that are used in many, many centers alongside the prohibitory side all the time. We don't tend to do that in this particular practice place. But I think we can feel into that we have to pour into the cultivating side of that and not just sort of tie ourselves down in some kind of rigidity, but to nurture the positive feelings there. And then the next one, embracing living beings. And for me, that's just a real kicker. The curveball in the mix, that it can seem like, okay, it's like, don't do the bad things, do the good things. It's sort of, if you simplify life in that sense, it's like, okay, maybe I could do this, I could ride this bike. But then embracing living beings where we're just within here, I'm chock full of positive and not positive intention. And out there, all the situations of my life are mostly the same, that it's never that clear cut. And so not to fear the messiness of that, but to actually engage, I think is what this pure precept points us to. And some other points I had in there is to how to grow unconditional positive regard for other beings within that, even though they're also chock full of positive and negative too. And from there, a line I have in my mind about how that works is realizing that all beings are suffering. And further, especially those people who commit, horrendous acts in the world, even those people are suffering. I remember that was kind of a constant mantra for me when our last president was in office. I was challenged in a lot of ways by his behavior, and it became a mantra for me to be like, could you imagine living in his heart? Imagine living with his eyes and his imagine being him. And I just kind of like shudder, be like, wow, that must be rough. That must be awful. And somehow, that didn't make the difficulty of the situation go away, but it could open a gateway for me to meet him in a different way in my heart. And so a last point in here in embracing living beings I wanted to mention was it's so quickly to externalize the idea when you read embracing living beings. But for those of you who were in the last class that we studied, we imagined this idea of no self, the very core Buddhist teaching that there's no permanent abiding Genjo in here, but that I'm a constant flow of living being. That actually we can imagine that as being I am many, many, many selves. In fact, every moment, an enactment of a new being, a new self. The flow of change is that acute and real and present. And so there we also have to embrace all of our own unwillingness, all of our own darkness, all of the parts of us that that are constantly not being as ethical as we would like ourselves to be. How is it that we start to embrace those beings as well? So I think this opens up this great depth of, very pregnant with meaning and opportunity to engage beyond just the kind of stop outside actions, right? There's whole layers of being we can encounter using that kind of formulation of the 3 pure precepts. And so tonight, I was planning to talk about this idea of ethical sensitivity that I've really been enjoying, that deepening, that opening into further layers, where we're neither kind of like paralyzed with fear about ethical issues, nor kind of really tight onto particular meanings and things like, oh, if we don't do it that way, like I'm not going to do it, but to open a kind of conversation about how do we grow subtlety and ability to receive feedback. So we'll bracket that. We'll get to that another night. I looked at the calendar and I saw that Fusatsu is next Monday, this coming Monday. And Fusatsu is a ceremony we do regularly here at Buddha Eye Temple. And it's so related to what we're studying here that I had to kind of prime the pump for it and offer some, a little bit of teaching around that and how we practice it here at the temple. And so Fusatsu is we call it our Atonement and Renewal of Vows ceremony. So Atonement and Renewal of Vows. Actually, could I see a quick show of hands? Who here has been to a Fusatsu? Okay, good chunk of people. Something really interesting about Fusatsu, it might be one of the most woo-woo and sort of heavy feeling ceremonies we do on a regular basis. And yet it's always so, I've been coming here for 10 years or so, and there's one every month on the full moon, the night of the full moon, no matter what night it is. And some people, it just like grabs them immediately, being like, Fusatsu, that's an important thing to do. And you can never really read who it's going to strike in that way. So just an interesting side note. But just some nuts and bolts about this ceremony. Here we sit a period of Zazen beforehand at 6:30 in the evening. And Joichi and I and whoever else is kind of around during the day will spend an hour and change setting up the hall for that. And we make up a very beautiful altar, including, for lack of a better word, a pine needle wand. It's kind of fun. I was making one day and I was like, man, I'm just making a wand right now. Like, this is really my life. My younger self who loved Harry Potter was quite happy about that situation. And so we go pick flowers from the garden. The ethic is sort of to go out into the world and find whatever's kind of in season. If in the winter, that just means greens. And we cultivate the space to make it beautiful. And so we sit Zazen, and then we start the ceremony after that. And Joichi, if you could hand out the piece of paper that I gave you. People online, I sent everyone something that if you could open it now, that would be great. I think it's something like Fusatsu abbreviated sheet or something like that. It's the only thing I sent you, so it's not difficult. But people in the hall, if you could not look at the one that starts at the top with taking refuge, sort of resist the urge. I want to do an exercise with that later in the class. But do people know this? So this is the hamburger way, and this would be the hot dog way. We're having a lot of discussion about that at the temple because he grew up in Washington here at the temple. He says he'd never heard that before. So everyone here knows it. Yeah, that's right. Okay, this is good feedback. I have to let him know. GKA is a no. Okay.
Did you not know?
So hamburger is like kind of stacked up. Hot dog is going to the side, also known as landscape and portrait. There we go. Anywho, big side note. Sorry about that. So here is out in front of you. This is the ceremony. This is all of the parts of it. It's kind of sort of set up in these chunks that we move through together. Do you guys have it? Yes. There looks of confusion. Okay. So it's set up in these chunks. And there's someone here over at kind of the Zen drum seat, the chant leader, sort of leading everyone through the process. And so it's not that long in one sense. Also, you will see little qualifiers at the bottom of many of the chunks that says repeat 3 times. So my family, they came to my ordination at some point, and of course everything is done 3 times. And so an hour and a half later, they were like, that was great. And why 3 times for everything? And I said there are probably many reasons, but one of them was undoubtedly that our ancestors studied the mind, and they found that their mind was often not concentrated, and for sure their students' minds were often not concentrated. So 3 is this really beautiful number where when you do something 3 times, it really asks you to meet it in another way. It's so easy just to kind of blow through something once or even twice, but that 3rd time almost always is like, okay, I'm here meeting it. I'm letting something sink into the soil of my mind and heart in a different way. And so overall, I really view this Fusatsu ceremony as a kind of an overall teaching about what it means to transform our karma, our ethical mistakes and the feedback we receive from that into energy and the grist for enlightenment and waking up within our being. And so seeing this here as the choreography of heart and of body and speech and mind here, but really I'd say essence of heart that can it's the choreography of waking up, essentially. And in one sense, it's a lot easier to digest once you start to have familiarity with the mythology and the beings that are sort of recited here and say these gathas at different times. But I think we can also see, even if that mythology and that kind of study isn't where you will go to within this tradition, that we can still find insights of what might be healthy to cultivate and to work with our own feedback and trying to live a better ethical life. And so I'm just going to go through this and sort of give you a little bit my stream of thought and how I hold some of these things. And then we might do an exercise in the middle and hopefully have some time to open for questions at the end. So in non-COVID times, we do this individual atonement at the beginning. This individual atonement, right, so a declaration of atonement. You have an opportunity, if you'd like, to state verbally by yourself, standing facing the Buddha, as well as everyone else is facing the Buddha at that time, to state something you'd like to atone for. Which is really, profoundly beautiful to be in a group of adults where that sincerity is coming forward and that trust in each other and that willingness to be vulnerable. And it's not necessary. You can also remain silent for that period. And during COVID times, we do not do this because many folks will join in online, and we've decided that the container isn't quite the same for people all being here and present together and people online.
Genjo, I had not realized that.
Mm.
And so throughout the whole COVID times, I'm like, I can't do that because it's being recorded and being sent out.
Yeah.
And it was so, like, oh, really?
Yeah, so sorry we didn't.
No, I could have asked. I could have asked.
Yeah.
So that part is just, is it held in silent? Like, so it just skipped?
Yeah, we pretty much just jump into the repentance verse. Yeah. So sorry. And so part of the intention here and what happens is if you're here in person and we share that, there's express kind of teaching that anything that anyone says is not spoken of anywhere else. Someone can bring it up with you if they like. If they said, you were here and would you be willing, I mentioned this thing, would you be willing to talk to me about it? But you'll never be like, hey, you said that. That's on my heart, mind too. It's a place of real vulnerability that we trust each other to hold that space. And Ejo said that even with his most intimate students, his highest students that he's been with for a long time, if they say something in Fusatsu, he'll never mention it. It's a place of complete, not interacting with other humans, but a place of you expressing your deepest intention in community and the Buddha and the Dharma all there present. So kind of a rare, beautiful thing, I think. And we'll see. Joichi and I were noticing that last time there was no one online. So we thought we might call an audible and say, let's do it. We'll talk with the boss this time and see what happens. So here, I think if there's kind of an overarching point that I'd like to make is that it's deeply important in starting this process to just, I'm liking the imagery and the idea of finding the hook in your belly. So see where you feel caught. It's not necessarily to find the worst thing you did or like kind of analyze, maybe that's a word, analyze your life and try and like match yourself up against the precepts, but to actually just feel, oh, where did I turn away from something? Where did I grasp onto something too hard that hurt others or myself? And that this has to be like the primary material of ethical work. And it's easy to become a little bit abstract. Like every time I've just been mean to my mother for 20 years, that's one thing. But to say, last Thursday I called her a jerk because she wouldn't get off my back about writing a thank you letter to so-and-so or something like that. Whatever it is, to go into the weeds of the specifics and to not kind of smear out the idea of it, but to feel into the actuality of it. So that being really important as a place of starting kind of ethical work. Next here we have the repentance verse. So this, all my past and harmful karma, born from beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, through body, speech, and mind, I now fully avow. So here, the movement of, I'll point to a specific word, that word avow. For the longest time, I thought it meant something like disavow, like take all the stuff I did bad and firmly kind of reject it. But that word avow means to lay bare, to make known without reserve. A really different energy there, just to reveal the knots of my tangled intention, not to cast anything away. And the other word I think to point out here that's so important is that word beginningless. It's quite curious, isn't it? The beginningless greed, hate, and delusion. So for me, that word is sort of teaching that this greed, hate, and delusion, it's not fundamentally mine. It's not me. And nor is it my parents, and nor is it Western culture, nor is it the fall of man with Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden. But that this idea that this greed, hate, and delusion, it's immediate and intimate, but without kind of ultimate substance. I'm not identified with it. And I think that these movements of heart really go hand in hand, that allowing something to be laid bare without clutching onto it, acknowledging the freedom of whatever's there just to be there and to meet it wholeheartedly, and the releasing of it into being beginningless, not mine. You can see that is kind of like plowing the soil for letting things transform within you. And so for me, even I take up this Gotha quite often in my life, I would say, when I'm finding that I'm really wrestling with something and clutching onto it pretty hard, and to know this in itself is a kind of choreography of heart, saying, you know what, beginningless greed, hate, and delusion, meet it fully, and that opens up quite a profound place of transformation, I'd say. So here we have starting with the hook in your belly, and then acknowledging that it's both yours and it's not yours, and desiring to see it fully. And then here, invoking awakened beings. This word Namu that's used in the front here, Namu past 7 Buddhas, Namu Shakyamuni Buddha, means something like praise or adoration or pay homage to. It can also mean something like calling it towards us, or also raising our vision to it, kind of like, invoking, maybe the textbook definition of that. And then it also means something like to plunge into. I think that's really beautiful here. And this, in a sense, is quite tricky for many people, because you might not be so familiar with the lexicon of Buddhism here, and what all these different beings sort of point to. So these past 7 Buddhas here it's said that no Buddha sort of wakes up on their own. They always receive it from another Buddha. And that goes back 7 times till another Buddha. And I'm not so familiar about the teaching of that, but it's even, sometimes we like to point at the Buddha as the one who figured it out. But then the tradition sort of says, nope, it didn't even start there. It's before that. It's before that. It always requires reliance on something. Even a Buddha knows how to rely on something. Or maybe they're the best at relying at something, we could say. And so those the Buddha transmission, the Shakyamuni Buddha, historical Buddha, also a way you could frame that as the present Buddha of our world. And then here, Maitreya Buddha. This Buddha is said to be going to be the future Buddha of our age. That's waiting in a heaven of deep contentment right now, waiting to be reborn on earth, or born for the first time as a Buddha. It's very confusing with past lives and future lives. Manjushri Bodhisattva is the being who represents wisdom. Samantabhadra Bodhisattva represents ceaseless activity. Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva is the Bodhisattva of compassion, so one who's willing to hear the cries of the world and stay with suffering. And then successive daiyosho. This term dai or daiyosho, dai means large or great, and osho is kind of a name for a teacher. So actually Ejo right now is an osho. That's his kind of one of his ranks within the school. And I think I want to say after he has a ceremony in October, he will become a daiyosho. A daiyosho. So people who know a little bit more about that. Ejo's rank and place in the school. That's kind of interesting. He's not yet a daiyosho, but he's on his way. He's on his way. So here, I think it's interesting, there's all that mythology and lexicon of the school. So in one sense, encouraging if you're interested to become familiar with those beings. And in another sense, if we're talking about more of a broad understanding of transforming our karma, is just bringing to mind beings who inspire us, embodied wisdom. So for me, a couple of people who come to mind are Gandhi and Mary Oliver, my parents now and again, although that's a more difficult relationship in some ways. My embodied teacher. So at times when I'm working with ethical transformation, calling to mind people who we love and deeply respect moves us in an important way. And so you can say this is kind of, maybe you could say, archetypal movement, like a deeply religious movement that's happening in this sort of verse of the ceremony. And there's a lot of prostrations there, as you can see. Something I didn't mention at the beginning, but people are welcome to come to this ceremony no matter what their physical ability. So you can stand the whole time, you can sit the whole time, you could probably lay down if you wanted to the whole time, if that's what you needed to do. This choki in particular, which is basically kneeling, is quite difficult on the body, so many people will make different bodily postures to sort of accomplish that part of the program. So just a little note there. So now, after invoking awakened beings, arousing those energies of awakening within ourself, an intention for waking up. And another way we could think of that is the formless essence of ethical living, which here in a way it fits really neatly with that idea of kai. Here these Bodhisattva vows, they're attending to all aspects of waking up within human experience. So here the beings are numberless, I vow to free them, pointing to the exterior side of human life, beings out there, delusions inexhaustible, the inside, right? Maybe you could say the selves on the inside, which only have pieces in their view of the world, moment by moment. And then the Dharma gates are boundless, I vow to enter them, pointing out the temporal and spatial aspects of life, saying that there's no point I could actually find in time or in space where it is contained, but it's eternal flow where I have the opportunity to do this practice. And then the Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Everything. The basis of human life is really Buddha nature, not deluded self nature, but Buddha nature, and relying on that. So here, after invoking beings of awakening, we say, they've got it. They've got it. I see it. I feel it from them. From there, standing up and saying, I can do that too. I can do that too. And from there, if we're saying that more represents kind of the kai and the spirit of ethical and virtuous living, then it moves nicely into this next part, which it's not very clear what's happening with the preceptor recites the Kyoju Kaimon. The Kyoju Kaimon is a particular fascicle about the precepts within our school by Dogen Zenji, and it's the core of receiving the precepts. They're laid out in detail. So there's the point we could say that moving from the kai into the ritsu there. So from the spirit arises the prohibitions and in fact just our 16 Bodhisattva precepts. And so here, this is really curious and so beautiful, I think, and I really deeply appreciate this in our tradition, that the precepts aren't just laid out sort of like, here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, you gonna do them? Okay. It's not that. he offers this poetic vision of the precepts. And I would say how trying to point us to the fact that these precepts come from Buddhahood and are always touching Buddhahood. So Ejo said that his only teaching that he ever received about the precepts from his teacher was that Buddhas keep precepts. Living beings do not keep precepts. Buddhas keep precepts. Living beings don't keep precepts. Something quite mystical and magical. So I thought I printed out for everyone on the back of this that commentary. But let's say if you would kindly turn it over. I think this document is quite loved and special within this tradition. It's not sort of passed around freely. So if everyone would kindly, in the hall, put it down, and I'd like to read it to everyone and allow it to kind of wash over you in a kind of way of receiving it. I'm not here acting as a preceptor, and these are formulated a little bit differently. But to allow the poetics and the imagery to wash over you and see if it jostles anything, moves anything around. Something I'm going to be talking about more in the next classes is this, the deepening of ethical sensitivity and how much imagination might be a part of that. Taking refuge. I take refuge in Buddha. I take refuge in Dharma. I take refuge in Sangha. Upholding the 3 pure precepts. Embracing codes and forms. This is the abode of the law of all Buddhas. This is the basis of the law of all Buddhas. Embracing good Dharmas. This is the Dharma of unsurpassed, complete, perfect awakening, the path of practicing and being practiced. Embracing living beings. This is transcending ordinary and sacred, taking self and others across. Upholding the 10 grave precepts. Not killing. Not killing life, the Buddha seed grows, and the Buddha's life of wisdom is reached. Do not kill life. Not stealing. Mind and objects are such, the gate of liberation is open. Not misusing sexuality. The 3 wheels are pure. There is no place of desires. All Buddhas are on the same path. Not speaking falsely. The Dharma wheel turns from the beginning. No excess, no deficiency. One complete moistening of sweet dew, gaining reality, gaining the truth. Not dealing in intoxicants. Do not bring intoxicants in, do not let them come in. This is truly the great brightness. Not discussing faults. Within Buddha Dharma, all have the same path, same Dharma, same realization, and same practice. Faults are not discussed. The way is not corrupted. Not praising self and criticizing others. Buddhas and ancestors realized the entire sky and the great earth. Manifesting the great body, there is no inside or outside in the sky. Manifesting the Dharma body, on earth there is not an inch of ground. Not being stingy with Dharma or wealth. One phrase, one verse is the myriad forms and 100 grasses. One Dharma, one realization is all Buddhas and all ancestors. Give them freely when requested, never begrudge them. Not being angry. Neither withdrawn nor set forth, neither real nor unreal. There are oceans of illuminated clouds. There are oceans of magnificent clouds. Not disparaging the 3 treasures. The body is manifested, The Dharma is unfolded, and there is a bridge in the world for crossing over. Virtue, returning to the ocean of all-knowing wisdom. The three treasures are immeasurable. Receive them with devotion and respect. Does anyone want to offer a phrase or a word that really resonated? I wish we had more time for this, but maybe just a couple minutes to see if anyone felt struck. Cindy?
I thought the whole thing was beautiful. You know, there was just something about the whole thing that was like, it was obvious, the meanings of what, you know, do not kill, do not find fault, but just by the explanation.
Yeah. Was there one? Yeah, Cindy. Was there one kind of? Did anything really hit for you? Like one phrase.
Yeah.
If you had to pick one. If you had to pick
All
one.
right, you know, I mean, it's the number 3. The number 3. I look at cyclists with lust in my heart, and I do. So yeah, it's that one. You know, I do. I look at him going down the street.
Does anyone else want to share? For me, there's not an inch of ground. That was one when I first heard this. And actually still, it just like something really splits open when I think I can understand what's going on here. There's not an inch of ground.
One that really touched me was under not being angry, neither withdrawn nor set forth. That a lot of times anger is projection, but it doesn't always show up that way. And so it just to have it laid bare like that.
Mm-hmm. Cindy, I'm gonna try and fish out someone else.
Okay.
Then I'll hold tight. Chikie.
The one that really jumps out at me today, I think, because I've been thinking about that one a lot, is the first precept when he talks about not killing life. I can't remember the exact words, but that embracing life, the life of the Buddha is manifest.
Yeah.
And that just feels so poignant to me right now.
Not killing life, the Buddha seed grows, and the Buddha's life of wisdom is reached. Do not kill life.
Thinking more, I mean, about, yes, killing for real, but also the ways that we shut each other down and cut each other off and limit people's capacity, even the people that we love the most.
Yeah. I find that when I'm ever working with the precepts, I have to work really hard not to reduce everything to not killing. But I actually think, and maybe it's not reduced, but like for me, it just, everything feels so like this. I don't know, my hand's crushing something almost always, and it feels like really alive that way. to image that and to feel into that. Well, thank you everyone for listening. I wish we had more time to kind of linger here, but we have to keep moving. So please, everyone online, I'll send you this copy in the email I'll send out tomorrow. And so the homework this week will be to spend time with these. And just encourage you, maybe read them every day. And those of you who might attend Fusatsu, these are read, and they're read in a slightly different form too, with quite a bit at the beginning in this poetic style, you could say, and also at the end of this exposition here. So I feel really lucky to be in a tradition that doesn't allow me to stop at my simplicity, but is constantly asking me to go further. So at this point, I guess I sort of missed a really important part that's dear to my heart. After, here at the very bottom of the left-hand column, there's something about the preceptor ascending the high seat. So Ejo gets on a slightly higher seat where he's sort of above us, and kind of a symbolism of we're receiving there from him. And at that point, that pine needle wand is used. A really beautiful image of it. Actually, it's called, I don't know what it is in Japanese, but wisdom water. He carries the weight of the tradition, and said that he has realized something in being held up and said to carry, the weight of the school, you could say. And that wisdom water is used to make a circle around everyone in the congregation. And I wonder if people are online, we might start spritzing the screen or something like that. But an attendant will go around and draw a sacred circle around all of us. Just really, really beautiful to be there. And so just, that's there. So here, sacred circle action, and then going into the receiving the precepts and the poetic side of those, which is so important, I think, not just kind of like checking off the list, but also challenging and deepening our own perspectives. Then after that, closing the ceremony with the refuges. And in a sense, for me, this is a little bit of you're about to leave, and you're starting at the beginning again. The refuges are the beginning of the precepts, in a sense, and sort of setting the container of your practice. And in fact, the last part of the Gatha for taking refuge in Sangha, may all beings support harmony in the community, free from hindrance. Right? That language is directly pointing at ethical conduct, directly setting us back in the saddle of creating harmony within our communities, so outside, and the community of myself right here. And then the invocation, we chant these gathas at the end of every, basically, service we have, and in a way, it's kind of like the hallelujah, I would say. The word language I use for it is, it's a capping verse where we wrap ourselves, we wrap the world as wisdom and connection beyond fathom or measure. So I won't do much teaching on those places now, but that prajna paramita, that's perfect wisdom, perfection of wisdom. Great wisdom, perfect, is what those words sort of mean. And then for those who are curious, the times we will close the ceremony with Ji Ho San Shi. That's this verse, but in Japanese. So we've taken up the style at the temple of, if we do a sutra in English, we do the capping verse in English. If we do it in Japanese, if we're chanting something in Japanese, then when we close it in Japanese. So the last thing I wanted to point out is the end of ceremony and maintaining noble silence when exiting the hall. So at this point, this is where it can feel kind of somber for many people, but we stay silent, and people will either kind of start cleaning up in silence, or people will leave. And the idea is kind of, because I don't want to give too much of an idea about it, but to let the ceremony and the sacredness of that space sink in. It could be easy just to be like, hey Joe, how was your na, and sort of lift out of that space really quickly. But you can see there's a lot of effort to hold something pretty deep, and to keep that sort of centered in your own belly and your own uprightness is important. So that's the material I wanted to get through tonight. I wanted to offer this inroad into Fusatsu, basically how atonement and reinvigorating, re-upping your sense of commitment to path, how that works here in the specific tradition, and how that might lead into more generally kind of thoughts about what it means to atone for little things in our own life. So it's interesting if you even go through this, and I've had a lot of fun drawing that choreography essentially. And sometimes when I'm finding something feeling stuck, it's like, oh, have I imagined someone I love and respect as a part of this situation? Have I decided to really lay it all bare? Have I decided to kind of re-up my inspiration? And just making sure that all those pieces are kind of there, and not in an anal way, but in an intuitive sense if something feels stuck or full. And it ends with a hallelujah. So we have a few minutes for questions, which feels rare and exciting. Anything going through people's head that they want to bring forward or have clarification about? Yes. Who was that? Was that Tojun?
Yes. Hi.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
It's getting really dark in my hands. Sorry. I have similar to what you read, the poetic versions or commentaries on the precepts from a little yellow pamphlet that I picked up probably 15 years ago from the temple.
Mm-hmm.
And I was really glad for your assignment because I went through all my old papers that are not very well filed and found it. And I just wanted to share this one. It's a little different. It was that I thought was really beautiful on anger. And it says, in the realm of the self, do not indulge anger, cultivate equanimity. And it says in the realm, is this okay if I read this?
Oh yeah, please.
Okay. In the realm of the selfless Dharma, not contriving reality for the self is the precept of not indulging anger. Mm-hmm. I just think that's great, not contriving reality for oneself. And the next part is not advancing, not retreating, not real, not empty. There is a brilliant sea of clouds. There is a dignified sea of clouds. Mm-hmm. I just think that's a really beautiful way to look at anger, at that really strong emotion that sometimes seems so uncontrollable in the moment. Yeah. Just contemplating those words. Anyway, I just thought I would share that.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. You reminded me what you read, the first thing you read, cultivate equanimity, not contriving reality for the self. Those are called the one mind exposition of the precepts, you could say, or the commentary of the precepts from Bodhidharma. So another a teacher in the school way before Dogen, who the effort there's often like the wrapping around to saying the fullness of the self is being blocked by indulging in anger. And so I'll send a version of those to everyone as well. Yeah, thanks. And then also I think the translation I read is Ejo's own translation of the Kyoju Kaimon. That the language was slightly different in there, and so anywho, we're also receiving the teacher of this temple's poetic mind too in here. Rose?
Genjo, can you describe how the hall is set up now and kind of walk through that?
Yeah. So I guess the very first thing I'll point out is that we'll put up a brazier, and a brazier meaning like a little box of ash with a coal on top of it, and everyone who comes is invited to kind of kneel down in front of that and place a little bit of incense and kind of like waft it on yourself. If you have a rakusu, you can take the rakusu. So if you've taken precepts, you will sense the rakusu. And it's very fun right now. Joichi and I, if you have a kesa, there's like quite an elaborate process of sensing the corners of your robe and one of your sleeves. And it's kind of an extra formality. I won't say formality. It is formal, but it's an extra part of the whole movement of, I don't know, raising your consciousness for kind of purity's sake, you could say. So that's there in the hall. Everyone's facing the Buddha here. Maybe Joichi, you could point the camera around a bit. People online could see. You might not add anything actually. So everyone's facing forward this way, and maybe there's not much to say, and everyone's 6 feet apart. And the whole ceremony is done facing the Buddha this way, and eventually the teacher will sort of ascend the high seat. The jisha, or the preceptor's helper, is kind of running around, lifting his robe and moving things around for him. And then basically you'll have a piece of paper in front of you, and you'll be sort of standing or sitting, and there'll be a little bell where everyone will kind of change postures and such. And I don't think there's much else besides that, and then nothing really changes after he leaves. Yeah, any other kind of formal questions about the ceremony? Or it's kind of straightforward. Usually we sort of celebrate not giving any instructions, which isn't such a good habit I think of, and sort of people get thrown in, and you're not expected to know anything, but to go along with the ride and sort of follow along. Okay, well, I think we can call it there. So once again, the ceremony's on Monday night, starting at 6:30 for Zazen, and you can join online if you feel inspired. And the next class, I think the next 2 classes, I'm hoping to have quite a bit more discussion and to be playing with this idea of ethical sensitivity and growing our imaginal capabilities to hold ethical life, and meeting some of the polarities we can end up in, which is a kind of polarity of feeling either just kind of stuck or ignoring something, and developing some ways to talk about or think about how we can meet situations with a little more flexibility and creativity. So an example that comes to mind is ruffian kids come in the backyard and are kind of doing something they don't want to. I sort of have a gut reaction that it's like, I have to tell them to leave, or I can pretend I didn't see them. And that I feel a lot of stress when my mind sets up the world in that way, versus I trust that they have some respect for me, some. And I am an adult and I can have compassion. I should go out and talk with them. And that, like, the whole world, like, things totally shift, right? But I think in so many subtle ways we can slice off bits of our own capacity without even realizing it. So I think it'll be quite fun to find some ways to play with that and draw out some places we can grow. We can put our attention in order to kind of grow our own ability to meet the world and meet the world. Okay. So we'll close with the refuges.